So we bring into our platform wearables with exposures, how many steps, right? Your steadiness, your steps. And you put those two together, what you start to get is a dose response curve, right? Just like when you're taking a pharmaceutical or prescription, how many steps is best for your movement health, how much lifting, how much exercise. You put those two together, that's the future.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Veneri. Today I'm joined by Phil Wagner, founder and CEO of Sparta Science. In this episode, we discuss the company's movement health platform. Phil details Sparta's evolution from training facility to software solution. Plus, we talk about challenges and opportunities in working with sports teams, military operators, and healthcare organizations. Let's get into it. The Fitt Insider Podcast is brought to you by Jack Taylor, our exclusive PR partner. More than just PR, they're creative storytellers and brand builders who actually understand the health and wellness industry. To learn more, head to jacktaylorpr.com/fit. That's FITT. Hi, Phil. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, likewise. Looking forward to the conversation. I think a lot to potentially get into. I mentioned offline that I've kind of been following intentionally, I think maybe at first not intentionally, and then intentionally what you're working on at Sparta Science. But for folks who aren't familiar, maybe just give us the kind of quick intro about the company and yourself, and yeah, we'll get into it.
Yeah, so the company started, like we had chatted briefly as a training center. I was an athlete, had a lot of injuries, both playing college football and then playing rugby in New Zealand, and continue to have these injuries, and there wasn't really a pattern. It was just like, hey, if there's a limb, that'll break somewhere. And really got frustrated by all this rehab that really didn't seem to be helping me, and so thought there could be a higher level of science that went into it. So went to medical school with this idea of like, hey, let's approach some of these issues like cancer, like diabetes. And when I got out of medical school, I thought, hey, we should set up this training center that does that. And that's really kind of what started this Sparta Performance. We saw college athletes, pro athletes, and it was, kind of where it all started. And we wanted to have this kind of epicenter for technology and high performance for athletes to come to during their off seasons.
And then just got to think quickly, since then has evolved into a hardware, software, enterprise. How sweeping is the kind of platform now? You don't have to get into the full depths. We'll touch on that, but just to set the stage.
Yeah, and we always had the idea of tech being at the core, just as a training facility, But as we started to grow as this training facility and more people came, it became frustrating to not help them when they left, right? So it's like, okay, we've got to provide something outside these walls, right? And yeah, thankfully where we're based, there's a few VCs in the Silicon Valley, and they're like, hey, this is a SaaS business. I said, I have no idea what that is, but okay. And they explained software as a service, and that's when we started launching the software as what was then kind of a small part of the gym just to use there in those four walls.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting and something that comes up a lot in talking with folks who start different varieties of, either fitness or performance focused businesses. Like somebody from an athletic background, they have some type of problem that there's no solution to seemingly, and they go about, creating this solution and then bringing it to the masses. When you did that, was the idea from even the facility, like, we're focused on performance, we're focused on injury prevention, recovery? Was it more tailored towards that kind of application? You mentioned like kind of physical therapy even, and that being the starting point?
Yeah, I guess for me, my perspective has always been that there is no silos between those areas you mentioned.
Yeah.
If you've got to perform, it may be on, traditional performance, high octane stuff. But if you have to perform, it may be because the best way to do that is for injury prevention or physical therapy, right? So they're all kind of in my mind, around human performance. It's really on the individual which aspects are needed more. Some individuals need more traditional strength conditioning, versus others need more mobility. And so it's really, the concept was, how do we use data to start triaging people down those different routes that they need as an individual.
It was always interesting to me growing up as an athlete, played college football, got into endurance sports after, actually ended up owning a gym and then CrossFit gyms and, kind of functional training facilities that there wasn't when you walked in the door basically some type of assessment other
Right.
than, best case scenario, you walk in, you have a trainer that asks you to squat to, the depth that you can, assess ankle mobility, hip mobility, like there, and that is even still today an outlier, right? So I guess why is that? Why is there, you mentioned there not being a silo, right, in your view of these things, performance, injury prevention, physical therapy, but even in if you just isolate one athletics like a weight room or even a fitness center or gym, like just devoid of any type of assessment going into, trying to strength train or whatever the modality might be.
Yeah, I think it's uh, because we're kind of ping ponging between two areas. One is this performance model where I don't want to be assessed unless I'm at peaking, right? So I don't want to do a squat max unless I'm gonna blow it out of the water, right? And so you do those once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, right? Playing football, like that's what we did, right?
Yeah.
Is it was 1 RM day and you take the whole session to get that 1 RM. So that's the performance side. And then the medical side, you have your annual physical, right? So you've got two options, right? But nothing in the middle. And the term wellness kind of has been cliched and overused, but that's really what it is. It's between those two goalposts. And how do you actually do assessments to make sure that you're operating at your best on a daily basis? And I think changing our mindsets that the best isn't the best ever, right? The best is more in this band of acceptable functioning, right? And how do you actually stay within that band, or maybe sometimes get into the band, but stay there? This idea of continuing to improve, you know, it's not possible. And so how do we actually maintain high functioning every day? And that's where those types of screens upon entry, I think, are really valuable, but they've got to be fast, right? Because time, everybody's that's their most limiting resource, whether you're an athlete, a soldier, a patient, right? You only have so much time.
So to that point, and it needing to be fast and needing to be kind of simplified, so whoever is administering it like understands it, the end user understands whatever type of reporting that comes out of it and can be applied. What does that experience look like that Sparta is delivering, and maybe how is it delivered?
Yeah, when we started with athletes, we had two, uh, kind of goalposts. One was it's got to take as fast as weighing in, because that's probably the closest screen we have, right? Like you go in, you weigh in, you start your workout. So it had to be that fast. The assessment had to be at the same time as it would take to weigh in. The second goalpost is what we called the bus rule. If the coach gets hit by a bus, can you do an assessment without that trainer, without that coach? Can the person do it themselves? Can they interpret it themselves? Right? At least at a high level, right? They're not going to get in the weeds. And so those are kind of the two, I guess, basis points we started developing the technology that we really wanted to provide when it came to screening.
In that today, as it looks like, whether it's, I guess, what are the most common kind of sites that it's being administered? Is it still in the weight room, in the fitness center, or physical therapist office? What are the most common, and what is possible in terms of where it can be administered?
Yeah, we certainly started in sports and we still work there a lot. And that's, quite a bit of business, but sports is only so big, and so we started to grow into the military, which is probably the largest place where we're currently operating. But then recently we started growing to healthcare. And we think that's important because all those, in a sense, tie together in some way. Healthcare. a lot of times is supporting athletes when they're injured. Can we start connecting people on their journey through a vital sign, if you will? Using some of these screens, can we connect them no matter where they are with a common quick standard, and then allow the practitioner to say, okay, here's how they're moving. Let me figure out how I want to address that movement, and then do this test retest the next day, the next week, to validate that where I think we should be going is actually happening.
Yeah, and you talk about this, like giving them the kind of metrics and quantifying that the movement screen and looking at all the applications across athletics, potentially fall risk or just the broader muscular skeletal system. When you are from a practitioner who's ever administering that standpoint, what are the takeaways that they're able to see and then potentially apply to those different settings, whether it is athletics, military, broader general population, and really give you that the idea of a score, a metric, quantifying it the same way that we see, now it's pretty common. You have a wearable device that gives you this your recovery score, your readiness score, your HRV, all these metrics, right, that are starting to move
Yeah.
into the kind of mainstream, but really lacking from like the movement assessment, like kind of ability of the body perspective.
Yeah, I think, we call that kind of ecosystem movement health, right? So I think in movement health, whether it's a wearable or some of the screening we do, or really any kind of data from movement, you're really looking for asymmetries. And sometimes asymmetries get oversimplified to, oh, left versus right, right? But if we think about wearables, it's activity versus sleep or activity versus readiness, right? There's a balance there in asymmetry, right? If I've got an activity score of 40 and I'm celebrating that I got a 95 recovery, well, yeah, there's a reason I'm recovering well. I'm not doing anything, you know? And so I think that's, you're looking for asymmetries between metrics that are of interest, right? And it's asymmetries, not left versus right. Asymmetry, at least some of the screens we do, if we look at a balance, it could be how much you're moving left to right versus heel to toe, right? And therefore, which types of strategies, movement strategies, are you relying more on or less on? And then therefore we can create a movement plan, practitioners create a movement plan to address some of those areas to reduce the asymmetry.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Is that, you know, you mentioned and I really liked the insight of like the kind of end user or patient or athlete being able to administer the test themselves, right? If the trainer got hit by a bus. Um, Is that the same way for interpreting the results? Would I know, looking at kind of the reporting, like, oh, here's what this says, and potentially here's what I could do about it, or how much of this experience is then guided by somebody intervening, that kind of like human or doctor or physical therapist, like in the loop to like really steer me along correcting some of these asymmetries?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think great technology is layered, right? So if we think about the Apple Watch, right? We can get resting heart rate, but most of us aren't going to go deep and read the EKG raw data, right? And so practitioners can have that information to go into it. And it's kind of the same way with the software we've created. Is at a high level, it's like, okay, my left isn't as good as my right, or my concentric phase isn't as good as my eccentric phase. Got it. I'm going to do this. At the deep layer, practitioners can say, okay, here are some other variables to contrast with it. And then another layer, right, for researchers is, okay, that variable is actually multi-scale, multivariate entropy, right? And so how can I look at that and the reliability of that over time? And so there should be kind of layers of, okay, end user, athlete, soldier, patient, just give me the info, I got to go. And then there's the practitioner of, I know the person, I know the science, I can recognize some of these patterns. So let me take a look at, under the hood. And then the deep layer is the researcher who's looking at, those raw metrics at a very deep level and how do they potentially, personalize what some of their insights are.
I think that's such a great point, especially now where we start to see there's a lot of conversation around like, we want to empower kind of the end user, right, with their data, and we want to democratize access to health insights. And what ends up happening is that, kind of what you were saying, is like there's just reams and reams and pages of data, and
Yeah.
you look at it and you're like, what do I do with all of this?
Right.
Like, where
Right.
do I even begin to start to apply any of it? And the idea of now getting to a place where we're not only like capturing it and we're not only analyzing it, but it's almost getting like kind of predictive with like, I don't even need to know necessarily like what it captured. Just like tell me what I should do on the other side, or potentially preventatively do to avoid any of this stuff happening in the first place. I guess, how close are we to that on like the movement health side?
We're close in some areas, and I think it really comes down to how much good data you have and how much big data you have, because, there's two sides to that, right? You know, Thankfully, we have a lot of sensors out there that can capture a lot of data. But the challenge is, right, it has to be good data. It has to be reliable metrics, right? So if we're if we're capturing all this blood data and some of the groups fasting, some's not, you know, some's in the morning, some's at night, right? Like you've got a lot of data, but it may not be consistent enough to actually find any insights, right? So, I think we've done a good job capturing a lot of data, but I don't think a lot of sensors necessarily are focused on reliability of some of those metrics. And that reliability is important because that only accelerates getting to the place of insights and predictive, directions and guidance. And it's really, I think, AI, ML is machine learning is pretty big, right now with ChatGPT, everybody's aware of it. There is value in having these large quality data sets and using machine learning to help find the patterns because there's so much information that it can really identify things that the human brain may not have thought of or just really can't recognize.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of, obviously, potential there, and it's interesting to see. I'm sure from your perspective, it's like this is not new necessarily. It's like you've been using a lot of these things, from the sensors to computer vision to machine learning, but now it's like, how do we make these connections between disparate data points, and ones that, like you said, even a human necessarily wouldn't make the correlation to know, like, oh, we need to put these aspects together and hopefully get us closer to the prediction and the action, to prevent and enhance performance, prevent injury and enhance performance. um, I did want to talk about the kind of transitioning, right, from that physical location to building the business, what that looks like. But one more kind of question as it relates to the platform. Um, who are kind of the end users, right? Who's buying it? Is it the health system, military, kind of B2B, or is there an application for like a direct to consumer?
Yeah, no, it's an insightful question because I don't think a lot of folks try to decipher that because they are so vastly different. That B2C route versus the B2B route. Everything's different. The sales, the marketing, the technical infrastructure, the type of investor, right? Everything is so different between the two. So we had to make a choice, you know, like most companies do, and to really go down this B2B route where the buyer, is generally the executive within that organization. Could be general manager in sports, athletic director, you know, general, colonel in the army, colonel and up. So officers, and then in the healthcare side tends to be, one of the three horsemen, the COO, the CFO, or the CEO. So those executives, why they tend to be the buyer is enterprise software has just a more complicated infrastructure that then kind of touches all points of the organization. And the nice part about that is you can accumulate a lot of quality data to help organizations. The downside for B2B is you get to go through compliance
Yeah.
and security and right and those and legal, which is much a greater scrutiny than a B2C process. So there's pluses and minuses to both routes, but you ultimately have to choose. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's why, kind of the root of the question, but also super interesting in that, and this goes to transitioning from that like athlete. Like, yes, you were trained in kind of medical school and exposure to all those aspects too. But like athlete performance, injury prevention, all the things that, as we talked about, like go together, but then kind of making this leap to, oh, now it's a SaaS business. Now it's a B2B enterprise platform. Now it's a selling into healthcare systems. Like that's a very different kind of beast, right? Than somebody who's passionate about sports and has an athletic background that, so many times when you start to talk with someone who's maybe founded a similar company, right? It's like, there's like a performance lab and they work with aspiring or elite athletes, and they have a very kind of select clientele, and they focus on all these lactic thresholds, VO2 max, and assessments and personalization, but it doesn't quite get to that level of like, we're able to scale this and turn it into something that we could then sell into a healthcare enterprise. So, and this might be going back a little bit, but I think it's probably relevant for other operators or founders who are thinking about the various paths that are in front of them. And it's like, how do you decide, and what does that even look like in terms of, to your point, it's an entirely different investor, business model, team that you're building. Was that in kind of organic over time evolution, or was that a distinct kind of point in time where you made that decision of like, oh, this is the kind of direction this company is going to go? Hey everyone, we'll get you back to the show in just a second. But first, I wanted to tell you about our exclusive PR partner, Jack Taylor. Honestly, this one's a no-brainer. We've known the Jack Taylor team for years. They work with some of the most innovative health and wellness companies. We're talking Whoop, Athletic Greens, Hyperice, and many more. Jack Taylor has an extensive industry network, knows how to work with high growth companies, and really invests in building long term relationships. I know this firsthand because they're Fit Insider's PR agency, so I can confidently recommend them, and I do all the time. From startups to more established brands, they go beyond pushing product to help companies truly thrive. To learn more, head to jacktaylorpr.com/fit. That's FITT. Now back to the show.
Yeah, no, I think it was a distinct, decision in that we wanted to ultimately help as many people as we could. And most of the individuals that we, were helping and are helping are connected in some way to an organization. And most of their time is spent with that organization, or most of the key decisions are being made by that organization. So a patient may not be living in the hospital, hopefully not, right? But they go there, and that's where like that's the choke point, right? That's where these decisions are made. And so we want to be there. We want to be at that choke point to help both the patient as well as the practitioner, make decisions that can actually impact the outcomes. And a lot of times you're one step removed on the consumer side. Um, and so that's where that distinct decision was made is, hey, we want to help teams. And teams could be a nursing team, that's taking care of patients. Teams can be the military, and obviously teams can be in sports.
Yeah, I think it's, potentially attractive from a founder's perspective, or starting to build a company, that like you want to start to basically build the product, right, you wish existed. I kind of alluded to that earlier on. It's like, oh, well, let's just make it and we'll just sell it to other people like me.
Right.
Right. And of course, if I want it, there's other people who are likely going to want it. And
Yep.
maybe everybody says they also want it. But when it comes down to, who's going to pay for it, and
Yep.
how long are they going to stick with it before they churn, and potentially how many people can we reach, where down this B2B route in terms of enabling organizations that serve other people, right? You have some of that distribution customer base built in. Have you seen, like, from that, I'd imagine, right, that as the teams start to implement it, then the individuals within those organizations start to use it. What type of feedback are you getting from them? And I guess from them to the organization back to you, in terms of the impact that it's having, what it's doing in terms of, across these different organizations, right? Healthcare is obviously different than sports teams, is different than the military. What kind of outcomes is that delivering, that A, continues to keep you motivated to do the work that you're doing, but B, keeps them paying, right? Keeps them engaged as a client.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the first one is, kind of similar to wearables, right? most folks can do simple math. If you go to bed at 10 and you get up at 6, that's 8 hours of sleep. Maybe it's 7.5, right? Because there's sleep disruptions. So you wear a wearable and it tells you you slept 7.5 hours, for example. The value of the wearable is it's telling you things and it's just putting a number on it, a reminder, and it causes you to change your habits. So that's one piece of feedback we get from individuals. It's like, hey, it's telling me kind of what I already know. It's just telling me that I need to do more of what I hate, right? So if I'm great at lifting, I'm great at strength, all of a sudden I know I got to do more mobility. But now I've got a number. And so if I'm going to go through the distaste of doing things I don't like, I at least want to know if that's getting better, right?
Sure.
Because, getting my heels further down on a downward dog is not going to cut it for me, right? I want to get a number. So that's one piece of feedback. And I think the other is, more on the practitioner side is it's validating for them too on is what they're doing working, you know, because, they're one step removed a lot of times from the outcome. Like winning football games is not directly correlated, to better movement, right? So if your team goes 1-10, but you can see folks moving better, that can start to validate, your job and some of the things that you're doing and how you can continue to kind of upskill that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And there's also the part when you kind of step back and look at, again, whether it's athletics or employers or healthcare, there's kind of this, it almost goes back to when you're walking into a facility for the first time and there's somehow no assessment or very little kind of technology or experience that goes around that. Um, Still, so many areas of performance, healthcare that in my mind, I'm going to experience I've had it like physical therapy, where they pull out kind of the protractor or like the measuring stick, or it's like the push pull, the force kind of testing on somebody's hands.
Yep. They call that the Oxford test, by the way. Makes it sound that makes it sound like super like clinical, right? The Oxford test, push into my hands. Yeah.
And somehow the entire kind of treatment plan is built around that. And then you go through the whole experience, right? And you get a little rubber band to take home, and then you come back and test again, right? Pretty crazy. And so I guess what I'm setting up is when you look at the landscape, and there's countless other examples that have kind of this similar gap, and really kind of questionable how they're kind of stuck in an archaic time. Where do you see the biggest opportunities to apply technology, and whether it's what you're already doing at Sparta or what you kind of see as opportunities on the roadmap, or just more generally like areas where there is white space, we can apply similar technology around movement health to say, look, we need to bring these assessments, these areas into the 21st century.
Yeah, no, it's the thing probably that excites me the most about what we're doing in the future is just this concept of balance, because it's such a rich, primal, and simple thing to do. You don't need to like have a lot of skill to do a 2 foot or even a 1 foot balance, right? If you practice it more, it doesn't mean you're going to get better, like a sprint, for example. So that excites me because it has such broad applications, from everything from coming back from injury to actually, minimizing injury. Our data science team, let me know a month ago that, they found metrics and balance that are more relatable to injury risk and performance than jump.
Mm.
And I'm like, come on, come on, guys. They're like, no, Phil, here's why. When you do a balance, you're gathering a million data points because it's over 20 seconds. And when you're doing a jump, it's, a second, right? You get, you know, far less. And so for a data scientist, they don't care what test it is, right? They just want to be fed like a monster more data. So if you're giving them 10x, 20x, 100x more data points, they have a lot more room to play in the sandbox, right? So they're taking all the balance. You get a million points per balance test times by 100,000 people. Like you got a big sandbox there, right? And so they're excited because it's like, okay, well, here's performance from balance in athletics, but here's TBI, traumatic brain injury, concussion, right? And here's ACL. And, just like a blood test, you can have one singular blood test and they can look at everything from, diabetes to cancer, right? And so that kind of, I guess, approach and richness that's occurring that's the part that's super exciting, is to see how far we can take that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Is there, as you were talking about that and like the kind of balance aspect, it's, you see somebody like Apple, right, on the Apple Watch releases like the fall detection
Right.
and the ability to do that remotely and analyze it, pretty much constantly as long as somebody's wearing the device. Do you see that kind of same opportunity to be able to do some of these things remotely, to be doing them consistently 24/7, or do you already take those kind of assessments into account beyond the kind of on-site testing?
Yeah. No, so we bring into our platform wearables like, whether it's a ring or a wrist strap or, Apple watches, and because they pair nicely together, because if you could put a screen that's standardized with exposures, which come from wearables, how many steps, right? Your steadiness, your steps, and you put those two together, what you start to get is a dose response curve, right?
Mm.
Just like when you're taking a pharmaceutical or prescription. How many steps is best for your movement health? How much lifting? How much exercise? And you put those two together, and that's the future. You get this dose response, all in a centralized place. You can really guide people to more precise recommendations.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting and, just so much more broadly impactful than some of these more kind of isolated or kind of
Point
device.
solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, point solutions or
Yeah.
confined to one platform, right? Or one device.
Yeah.
um Again, and that goes back to like this consumer versus enterprise platform and model. As you think about, one of the things I mentioned was at following along and kind of seeing updates come out of Sparta Science, whether it's, raising additional funding or potential, partnerships with different military or sports teams. Um, to the extent that you're able to or want to talk about it publicly, are there other things that are, whether it's partnerships, funding, kind of growth, that we should look out for or on the roadmap that you're particularly excited about, already kind of have working on?
Yeah, I think for most founders or CEOs, raising money is, not always the most enjoyable thing, right? It's,
For sure.
having a colonoscopy, right? And
Yeah.
but it's not over in an hour or two, so it's so as we got done with funding, we go to full execution mode right after funding. Um, because we want to make sure we're putting that investment to work in the right places. And one of the challenges is technology in particular when it comes to machine learning and just B2B software in general, requires a pretty large headcount of capable people. And when you work in the government, US government, it also can't be overseas, right? So you've got to have, folks that are based and highly competent more in the US. And, so that's where we tend to put a lot of our investment. The challenge is like building a great product you mentioned earlier doesn't immediately translate to revenue, right? You've then got to be able to put in the business steps after the product, right? To connect a better product with the right messaging and then the right pricing, right? And then the right sales team and connect that all the way to the organization, right? So that's kind of the phase we're in now is like, okay, how can we better message and educate the market on what movement health is and the wide applications that exist?
That's what I was going to ask. It's great to hear that kind of transition and thinking about really being executing, right? Heads down, like doing this, doing the work, um, getting the kind of feedback and experience right in market and evolving the product and platform and messaging. Has there been, does there continue to be this kind of gap around movement health? I think when you look at some of the numbers, whether it's chronic pain and the impact on productivity, the impact on absenteeism, the impact on potentially healthcare spending, and then what you get into with pharmaceuticals, right? Everything trying to remedy some of these issues. I think at a high, and not to mention like fall risk, and right, we're not even getting into anything that has to do with athletics down that path.
Right.
Um, when you start to look at the statistics, the market, the issues that people are facing, it's like pretty obvious. And I think that employers get this and healthcare gets this. When you start to then try to encapsulate what it is and put movement health around that and articulate what a solution is and, get people to buy into that, potentially not as easy, especially when, as you said, you're dealing with C-suite purchasers, right, at healthcare or very high ranking officials in the military. What is that experience like from, right? There's the sales aspect, but also the kind of marketing. How do we even articulate what it is that we're trying to do in a way that people are going to be able to kind of understand and grasp that?
Yeah, yeah, it's certainly been an area I've struggled with. I'd say first, when you have a big market like movement health, focus becomes just critical. And I'd say the majority of mistakes I've made as CEO have been getting excited to try to do too much. And that focus and sequencing of what you're trying to do becomes really important. So you've got to be committed to that sequence and that focus, yet still open because, things happen you may not expect. But that's probably the biggest challenge. And I think growing from that, the other key is making sure that when you do have that, focus, that you're able to communicate it clearly to the team, right? So they're focused as well because, if we go out and message, hey, we're a data platform, that was tough for me to get on board with. Yeah, so what? What are you going to do with a data platform? And we just have a great tech team, and our CTO is fantastic. And he's like, no, if you want to do all these things you're talking about, you need a data platform to collect everything and collect it in a raw format. So we have, the kindling, if you will, to get these fires going. Without a data platform, no one can answer these questions that we're talking about, right? And so that's where the messaging becomes tough is people want now, but good insights, good data is not now. So you got to kind of balance those two.
Yeah, I think that's an important insight too when you think about, you know, what it is that's kind of happening under the hood and behind the scenes, and also what people ultimately are buying into, and how you bridge you bridge that gap and bringing it to market really. Um, when you think about, and as we get to the end of the conversation here, just wanted to look ahead a little bit. You mentioned kind of being in execution mode, continuing to really stay flexible but focused, right? And as you're implementing these different learnings and making sure that you're articulating things clearly with that messaging, is there anything that kind of stands out to you, as even call it on the back half of the year here, because we're already what, almost halfway through the year,
Yeah.
um, that's like a key priority or kind of milestone that you, in talking to the team and thinking about what it is that you all need to accomplish, you kind of have it out there as a benchmark? Or is it more so just you already implemented this plan, right? When you went out and raised additional funding, you had that roadmap, and now it's just continue to be heads down as you execute it?
Yeah, I think a company is very much like a child in that each stage is so different, and the stage that we've evolved into now that we've already just we just started launching is okay, we were this quick, accurate, reliable screening tool. That was a standalone opportunity for people to measure movement. Now we've created this movement health platform, which certainly involves that screen, but then brings in any other data sources that are of interest. Wearables, surveys, um, motion capture, computer vision, anything can come in there, and that allows the users to actually have this much broader and more comprehensive picture, so things aren't looked at in isolation. So that's kind of where the rest of the year and the future is focused for us. Is let's really expand this movement health platform beyond just the one screen, to really actually in a way give more power to the screen because it's able to kind of connect, like we were talking earlier, exposures, things like wearables, with results, things like the screen, right?
Yeah, I think that's continuing to see that evolve, and really how big the data platform can be and what all can be integrated, um, is going to be exciting to watch unfold. Just the applications, right, of this type of solution. Um, I think in wrapping up there, what was coming to my mind is a lot of the listeners potentially are people in that kind of C level that could be purchasers, customers of the kind of platform, but also other companies, device makers, software, all these things that could potentially integrate and become partners. If someone was interested in learning more, kind of engaging, where's the best place to do so? Just the website,
Yeah.
social, where would you direct them?
Yeah, the website's probably the best source. It's the most current. We certainly have social channels as well, and LinkedIn and Twitter, but the best source is the website, which will have information. And yeah, we're always looking to partner with organizations, individuals, but then also, yeah, other devices, other technologies, which is, yeah, I think it's not going to be one technology that kind of solves the problem, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll link all of that kind of in the show notes with all the resources. Encourage people to reach out, but also just continue to follow along and see how the platform evolves. Certainly, huge impact to be had. So I appreciate you making some time today to share it with us.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks, Joe.
One more thing before you head out, help us spread the word. Take a minute to rate and review the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or share this episode with a friend. And if you like conversations like this, you'll love the Fit Insider newsletter. We send it every Tuesday. The link is in the description. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week.